Ha ha ha. It's gonna take a second anyway.
All right, so
Wait 1 second.
we're calling this the the three pontificators, the pontification.
Do you want to save your jokes till we get to the live stream?
No, I want to like officially label these.
Well, it
And
already
like,
has a label, but
no, it doesn't. When we send this out to our
there we
vast
go.
social media presence, I would like these sets of live streams to reflect our pontification.
All right, Sam. Well, we are live now, so
So that means I can let the expletives fly.
you can certainly do that if you'd like. I wouldn't recommend it.
Are you trying to censor me, Michael?
No,
This
I'm
is
trying.
bullshit. I'm out of here.
I'm trying to de-amplify you, Sam. I'm trying to reduce harm on the platform.
That's a bunch of booty. I really loved I mean, we can get into it, but I really loved the one dude's response, like buried deep in some Substack. He's like, guys, I really think this is a slippery slope. I'm that guy. That's probably like some janitor or something that's just like,
No, it was on the he was on the review team. That's from tonight's files, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I've only made about halfway through those. So give me one.
Wasn't it some? Was it? Wasn't he pretty high up though? The one who was the one who questioned it at the First Amendment issue.
I don't know. I can only I
I
only
know, like
think
Ben Shapiro had him on his podcast.
You're talking about two
before.
different people. Yeah, we'll flesh this out.
Oh,
for
we're
sure.
talking about two different people.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Sam's talking about someone who was on the content, was involved in the content review pipeline internal to Twitter, and you're talking about House Rep Rokana.
Yep. There we go.
Okay. Well,
tonight I'm going with Mike. I think you got me or you didn't give me this, but it was part of the business care package.
yes.
A Hoya de Monterey.
Oh,
Can we
yeah,
it was
that's fine.
the Excalibur. So we'll see how good it is.
Well,
It's like you got to go with the Excalibur tonight.
we need our HR guy here to be like, oh, Hoya de Monterey
you-
isn't sponsoring us. Just FYI, please don't sue us. We love you, Kyle. I'm sure you're tuning in. No, I think the some of those cigars we sent, they have that giant discount bundle, like that every cigar shop has. Where it's like, hey, we're trying to like move these, and there was one point in time where we just like grabbed, I don't know,
Bought everything.
a dozen of them.
Yeah.
So that might be one of them. I can't remember.
Those are the best bundles, though.
Yeah, sometimes you get really
No.
lucky.
Yeah, I've never had this, so I will let you know how it is.
Please do.
Dog shit.
Yeah.
Just-
Or as the late Bob Call would say, it's like running downhill with your mouth open.
Right.
Doesn't taste like anything.
Yeah.
May you rest in peace.
Yes. Rest in peace,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Call.
Oh.
All right.
Good man.
So, with that interlude out of the way, Sam, what did you want to call our meeting today? The pontificators?
I wanted the pontificators. Just whenever we get together to talk about the most recent news stuff, which I hope can be, I don't know, somewhat frequent around. Maybe at least a month would be, I think, a starting goal. I don't know, Mike. That's kind of what I'm.
Well,
thinking.
we have a quarterly one, and so adding a monthly one would just be adding,
and that one will be called the quarterly orderlies. But this one,
Trademarked.
For those who didn't know, Sam is a marketing genius.
hey, I am, and we should fire our CMO, the chief marketing officer, or whatever his name is.
Yeah, he's oscillates between CMO and CCO, chief content officer.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, I want to do I wanted to do this like maybe once a month to just, if some of our followers or just anybody really, I don't know if we want to limit this to just supporters or how you want to do that, Mike. Let's just talk about the most
Random
recent stuff in the news. Yeah, or just it could be anything. And then of course it has to be
talk about
called.
guns.
We could.
We can talk about soccer.
Just pull up all of
No.
the flag wars
Pass.
that get live streams deboosted and demonetized. But no, the quarterly live streams will be available to everyone. The monthly live streams, that might be a good thing for us to do with respect to just locals only. So freedomcast.locals.com.
Your mom?
Free to join. My mom is a supporter, yes. Among others. But, okay.
Mom.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about the Twitter files tonight. And there have been 4 rounds.
Demonetized.
Yeah, demonetized. So the first bout came out last week, late last week, I believe. And then the past few nights, they've been pretty steadily kind of trickling out. First round was from Matt Taibbi. Second round was from Barry Weiss. Matt Taibbi, formerly of Rolling Stone, did some stuff on 2008 financial crisis, kind of blew up some of the overstated reporting with respect to Russian collusion. Barry Weiss, formerly of the New York Times, left because she felt, though she herself is liberal, that the New York Times was being run by a bunch of people who were very illiberal and had a kind of transgressive and totalizing ideology. And so she left. She had the second round of the Twitter files. Third round was back to Matt Taibbi. And then this fourth round is being released or run through via Mike Schellenberger, who is a former Democrat and also former independent candidate for governor of California. He's someone who is probably most well known for his advocacy on trying to address homelessness and mental illness in California, as well as balancing competing interests with respect to energy and climate change. So those are the people so far.
This is great because I actually want to ask, because I don't know, I'm not very familiar with these 3 individuals, Taibbi, Barry Weiss, and Schellenberger. Would you say, you said that one of them was like liberal, but would you consider any of them to have a conservative-leaning opinion?
Any conservative-leaning opinion? Or to be
majority.
Overall?
If they were gonna, be on the compass anywhere, do you think any of them would be right of center?
No, not in any sort of stable, objective sense, except for the fact.
According to the left, though,
right?
They have been red-pilled, but I don't think their beliefs are.
Yeah, great point.
Conservative. I think they just believe in free speech.
Yeah.
Right, and that's fine. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. My only point was going to be to point out how, I'm sure it was a strategy that Elon chose certain left of center individuals who are credible and positioned in the liberal space, the free speech advocate space.
Mm-hmm.
But doesn't it say something that there is not a free speech right of center person that they chose? I mean, simply because most people would say, oh, there's a far right, blah, 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 and not have any credit towards it.
So I will say that there's another important dimension here. This actually gets to some of the research that I'm doing. Shameless plug. Hopefully we can talk about it third quarter of next year. And I think if it works out, it will.
I'll be on vacation that day. Sorry, Mike.
Tragic. But no, I think that if it works out, it will get to the heart of a lot of the what I call towers of tautologies that get built around online information quality and content moderation. So we can talk about that in a second. But the important dimension I think that you're also missing here, and it's not that you're wrong. I think that there is this asymmetry in terms of partisanship, but there's something else, which is they're all independent. None of them work for the New York Times or the Washington Post or NBC News or Fox News or whomever. They are all involved in primarily independent media now.
Yeah. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, I don't think that's. Yeah, there's no issue there. I'm just saying that it speaks to something in our society today that if you are going to reveal what was once believed to be a right-wing conspiracy theory, you're going to give it to the hands of no one right of center. You'd give it to the hands of someone who's left of center and independent and all this, because according to probably I don't know, maybe it's just that people on the right are viewed as being, I think, unfairly viewed as being, I don't even know what to call it, more conspiratorial or what, but
Well, there
I
are.
certainly don't.
It's like what do you say? Like, first of all, what's a conspiracy theory? So
Right.
it's not an. By the way, I'm going to call out Cameron Ballard from New York University, fellow PhD candidate. He's done some very interesting work on advertising on YouTube as related to conspiracy videos. Love to talk to you, man. Please get back to me on my emails. We've been going back and forth. Where'd you go? He seems very nice. And like I said, I started him on another podcast. He seems sharp. But the question of like, what is a conspiracy theory? It's like, well, we need some sort of objective definition. And then there's certain conspiracy theories that are more prominent on one side of the aisle versus the other. But there are certainly some relatively well-known, consequential conspiracy theories that are right-leaning. But I think I take your point, which is something like, if you involve people who are of a particular political persuasion, who have sufficient social clout, just by including those people, some will use their inclusion as evidence that undermines whatever's coming out. And we see them trying to do this right now with these other people, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's
I mean, they're trying to paint Matt Taibbi, who was the first one who came out, as being red-pilled and as being, having conservative values.
Mhm.
Right.
They're trying to use that to remove his authority he has on this topic.
right.
Right.
So we already see that. If they had picked someone who would full on the right, it would have been game over from the get go.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
they would
that's
have
why.
said- Go ahead.
I was just gonna say,
We're pros at live streaming.
as you can tell.
Yeah. Very good, Sam. I forgot what I was going to say.
Sam muted himself.
Yeah, I saw.
No, you said it exactly. There's a reason why they did not give the information to anyone who would have been right of center. And yeah, I mean, that's just my point anyway. So,
But okay, here's a in fairness. So I think one criticism or one description I've heard is that the people who he's targeting or who have been given access to these files. By the way, Elon Musk has also stated publicly that once they have all of the information that they think they can get, and that the story has come out through the channel, through the actors and agents that he's giving first right to, he's going to make it all transparent. So there will be a lot of like digging through stuff to try and like discredit this later, and to also find out if there was genuine like omissions or dishonest context. But it will be available for people to go through, unlike past regimes, let's say at Twitter. So there's that. But in fairness, the people he's targeting seem to be more like the intellectual dark web thread, or kind of that nature, where it's like classically liberally inclined, but also the subset of those people from the intellectual dark web type who are still have some good social standing, like they would still be invited to cocktail parties with people who consider themselves very important. There's not but I think one thing we could say is who is if you're concerned that you want someone on the right to be looped in, who would you point to from the right that is not associated with legacy media, because that's something we've is an independent person, and who would handle this in a way that is trying to follow the facts and constructing a narrative from those facts, but not looking to impose some partisan thing a priori? Can you think of anyone?
Well, no, but that's not saying much. Simply because I'm not very familiar with a lot of new journalists, let's say. So yeah, I not off the top of my head. No, can you?
Franklin?
No.
So yeah, this is a good point. Like I don't know who would be like, oh, this is kind of such a travesty, but it's like, well, who would it be? And I think one of the issues is that a lot of the people who are conservative are actually associated with like avowedly partisan outlets. So like you think of any of like the Daily Wire crew, for example, very popular.
Megyn Kelly has Is Megan Kelly still associated with an outlet?
No, she's
No.
just she's independent. That might be a fair
Right.
person. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good
Okay.
one.
Yeah.
I was also thinking, I mean, even though he is part of an organization, and yes, it's it's probably a whole nother thing, but I was gonna say Project Veritas. But even even though he's never come out and said a political leaning one way or the other, he's always branded as you know, far right or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But he just receives tips and then goes and exposes wherever that corruption was. So if there was someone inside of Fox News who would send him a tip line, then supposedly he would release it. Now, I don't know. Maybe he has received it and has not released it. Then that obviously would make him a bad actor. But that might be someone who's, even though he's associated with Project Veritas, I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I don't think there's a chance. I think you would do as much damage if you had Tucker Carlson on the staff as if you had James O'Keefe. It's not a matter of is it a fair characterization to call him right wing or not? It is fair to people will say his clips are edited or taken out of context, and he'll say something like, well, no, it's them in their own words. But we all know that what he's doing is he's cutting off large segments of what people are saying. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad. The media does that too. It's just that they get really incensed when he does it. And he's got some, I've talked about this offline. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the way he goes about some of his stuff, but be that as it may, I don't know if he has the broad social trust that if they brought him in, it would add more value as opposed to just being ammunition for those who are trying to discredit everything that's coming out as it comes out.
No, I agree. I wasn't offering him up as someone who had broad social trust. I was offering him up as someone who I would consider as being viewed as on the right, even though, like I said, I don't think he's really come out and said anything to indicate who I would consider trustworthy. Mm-hmm. That's just me. But obviously, I do agree with you in point taken. The larger population would not agree with me, and therefore I would not want him to be the one to release this stuff.
I got you.
So,
okay.
What about Brett Weinstein?
Yeah,
Is he too
he's
far
on
right?
the left.
I mean, well,
wait,
Brett? He's left, but no, I mean,
pretty sure he's
not right. But I feel like he's
also not a journalist.
Theorist.
Are you talking about Brett or Eric?
Which one's a journalist?
Neither of them are journalists.
Neither
of them. Brett is
he's a former evolutionary biologist professor,
right?
And
okay.
Eric Weinstein is the former manager for Teal Capital, or is a manager for Teal Capital.
So Brett, the one he was at Evergreen, right?
Yeah, he was at Evergreen.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
That's interesting. Maybe. I mean, he's kind of cut from the same cloth as the people who've been looped in so far.
Yeah.
So perhaps he would be an option.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I mean, so far it's been these three. They also have talked about this new foundation that they've started, or outlet they started called the Free Press. It's a brilliant name. So this is their website, thefp.com, and looks like they've got a fair amount of articles here. I was looking to see if I could just very quickly find.
We can't see your screen. Are you sharing?
Oh, sorry. The people on the live stream can.
Okay.
Yeah. So
we don't matter.
True.
That's all right.
No, I'll send it to you in the chat window. But it's thefp.com, and any case, that outlet I think will become increasingly important. It's one of the conditions for the breaking of this story was that they had to break the first story. Each of these kind of episodes, let's say, has to come out first on Twitter, which makes sense because Elon's trying to drive traffic to Twitter, and also because it's kind of like depending on your perspective, it's either the central forum or the scene of the crime, or both for this issue. So anyway, we should probably get to the files at some point, because we're kind of talking, whistling past the graveyard a little bit. So let me just very quickly find Mike Schellenberger's tweet from tonight. Again, he's the one who's broken Twitter files for, because his first several tweets here, I think, summarize things very well. He says, for those catching up, and this is on December 10th, 2022. He says, for those catching up, please
Really
see...
quickly, Mike, before we start,
Uh-huh.
Sarah Lewis wants to know, she says, for those not on Twitter, why should we care about the Twitter expose? And what does it mean for those who are not engaging with Twitter? I think it's important to touch on this before we
That's fair.
We get into the actual files.
Okay, very good. And also, Kyle has a question, will there be accountability? We'll get to that, Kyle, as we discuss the Twitter files themselves, because I think that there's... What does it mean by accountability, and under what context would that be maybe justified versus certain contexts where it just won't be. It's just people may disagree, and the accountability might just look like they lost their jobs at Twitter, and that's kind of it. But okay, for those not on Twitter, why should they care about this recent expose or this ongoing expose? I would say that there's a couple things here. One is that Twitter is not the most popular digital platform, but is an exceptionally influential digital platform for news development and news breaking, because a lot of journalists centralize there, and that's kind of where narratives are crafted around political issues and non-political issues. But news is often broken and disseminated on Twitter, if not first at scale. And so Twitter is kind of like, if you think about anyone who does a political podcast, they will inevitably cite things from the day before on Twitter, right? Because even doing a daily podcast, you can't keep up with this stuff. But Twitter, it's politics in real time. It's news in real time. And to be sure, there's false stuff out there as well. So Twitter is exceptionally important for that reason. Even if people themselves are not invested in it directly, they're indirectly impacted by it, because that's where collective sense and narratives are made and formed.
And I'd also point out that even if you don't like the direction that Elon Musk has taken Twitter, I believe that pre-Elon, Twitter was still probably the best platform for free speech as far as like people's ideas getting out there and figuring stuff out. Because a lot of times the ideas would get out there, and then yes, we are seeing now, have a bunch of suppression and amplifying, but it still was probably the best bet. I mean, Facebook didn't have the reach. Other platforms didn't have the reach. So if you were an outsider saying like, hey, what platform should I join that has the largest pool of free thinkers and free thought, Twitter would have been the place. And arguably Twitter is now after Elon. So that's what I'd say.
All right,
I think it's also important to note that the Twitter files are not, they are the Twitter files. However, that these are things that are going on in all other social media platforms. I think it's safe to say that Twitter influences Facebook, Instagram, everything else. How often do you come across a screenshot of a tweet on Instagram or Facebook, when it's dealing with political things? So I think it heavily influences everything else. So even if you're not on Twitter, you're getting tweets. And they're always Twitter on Fox News and CNN also.
So let me share let me see if you guys can see this when I share it. This is going to be super clunky for people. By the way, they're going to see that I have like some Elon Musk quotes in my background on desktop. I'm unavowedly like pro that guy. I think the guy who figured out how to recycle rockets and make commercial cars viable has as good a shot as anyone of figuring out how to moderate digital platforms and balance competing priorities. But okay, so what this is here is it's statistic. It's just they gather stats. It's the exact precision here is not so important. What is the relative. So this is monthly active users comparing across different platforms, and it's in millions, right? So this is 2.9 billion essentially for Facebook. And you can see way down here, Twitter is like not very popular, right? And if we were to pull up similar numbers for like the revenue per employee, Twitter is also kind of like less competitive than some of these other platforms. And so when we talk about it not having the same reach, it's not exactly that the user base is smaller. It's much more that it is that the user base is smaller, but for Twitter, but it has an outsized influence. It punches above its weight in terms of the role it plays in our national and actually international news discourse. And it's kind of probably an accident of history, something like that so many in journalism flocked to this platform and used it to break and talk about news stories and express their opinions. And then there's this kind of dyadic element where journalists interact with news consumers on social media, and vice versa. And the news consumers themselves can also become news producers because of the proliferation of technology and lower barriers to entry for journalism, all that kind of stuff. So the confluence of these events means that Twitter is very popular. Now, why does that matter? Beyond, with particular focus for this expose, well, there have been claims made by several people that there's bias in how Twitter moderates speech online. You can think about it this way. Twitter has certain legal protections that it does not have to, it will not be held accountable for abhorrent stuff said on its platform, but it still doesn't want to have just extreme vitriol, let's say, because that would be an unpleasant user experience. They have a commercial interest to keep users on the platform. If it's a vitriolic user experience, you're likely going to have fewer users. You can charge less for advertising or subscriptions, whatever your model is. And so you'll be a less commercially viable product. And then maybe you also have some ethical norms that you don't want people to, be harassed or whatever in some particular form. And that's all fine and well. But the issue here arises when there's some asymmetric biases being built in. And that's what people mean in terms of how the rules are written and when and how they're enforced. And what the Twitter files are helping show is that despite contentions to the contrary and despite testimony and claims by others, there are particular facts that are true that people were claiming were likely true, and we're just getting around to seeing them because he's kind of pulling the veil back and we can see under the hood. So, hopefully that answered Sarah's question. And like I said, Kyle, we'll come to yours. For those just joining us, you can, if you log into YouTube, you can drop a chat. We'll get to it when we get around to it. All right, so let's kick it off. So part 1 of the Twitter files was released by Matt Taibbi. That's about 8 days ago today. And as Mike Schellenberger writes, it documents how senior Twitter executives violated their own policies to prevent the spread of accurate information about the Hunter Biden laptop. We will talk about that in a moment. I also want to get your thoughts on something that Professor Marshall Van Alstyne from Boston University has. It's an idea he has for how to balance free speech with the ability of a platform to take content off they don't like. That's particularly relevant for this Hunter Biden story. Part 2, which was released 2 days ago. Barry Weiss shows how senior Twitter execs created secret blacklists to de-amplify disfavored Twitter users, not just specific tweets. And this distinction between users and tweets will be important for a reason we'll talk about in a moment, particularly because currently legacy media is trying to say Elon Musk is a hypocrite because he said he would use these same tools, and now people are pretending to be outraged even though they're okay with Elon Musk using them. Part 3, back to Matt Taibbi, and this was yesterday. He documents how senior Twitter execs censored tweets by Trump in the run-up to the November 2020 election while regularly engaging with representatives of the U.S. government law enforcement agencies. This will be important because we're going to also tie in some reporting by a very left-wing publication. Many credits to Li Fang and, I forget the guy's first name, but Klippenstein is the co-author. For their reporting for The Intercept and about how DHS and the Disinformation Governance Board came to be the train wreck that it was and how it's kind of continued underneath the hood, or behind the scenes, rather. And then part 4 tonight is how Twitter came to ban Donald Trump in the aftermath of January 6th and the, kind of, again, a look behind the scenes of what was actually going on. So should we start in any particular order, or should we just kind of open it up to saying like what,
our thoughts?
Yeah, what our thoughts are. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if going through them and reading them one by one is necessary.
Maybe just like parts 1, 2, 3, 4, like just summarizing.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's fine. I think I was actually, when you were talking, you were saying there's someone had an interesting idea on how you can balance between free speech and then getting the stuff off of it, content off of it that was deemed bad or something. I'd be very interested to hear that sort of suggestion, because I personally see this. I mean, I think I mentioned this at some point before. This is, I mean, it's such a slippery slope.
Yeah.
In any time when you ban speech, nowhere in history has that led to good things. I mean, it's like when especially when it comes from top down, when it's like some high level authority is starting to ban the speech of minorities, not minorities, but just the citizens, the everyday person.
It could just be a minority viewpoint. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's never led to anything good, and the line will always move. So this is why I think I am not shocked. I think this is all these Twitter files coming out. It's extremely necessary, but none of them are shocking to me. I mean, when this stuff comes out, I'm like, yeah. I mean, we've been saying it for years. If you have a lick of common sense, you would have called it a long time ago, which I many of us have. And so, yeah, it's not surprising, although important and very good to actually have some receipts here and get people talking about it. I think it's worthwhile. I also want to ask the question. I think maybe this will get into Kyle's question earlier about ramifications or repercussions. Is anybody going to be covering this on the mainstream media?
So
that you know of?
Yes, we can talk about that in just a second, because that's a fair point. Because there's an impulse for some in legacy media, let's say, to pretend like this is just a purely online phenomenon, and actually to make the point you said, which is something like, oh well, we kind of knew this already. But that's a form of gaslighting in a particular way, and not so much in another way. But it's very easy to say we knew this already when you could say, like, I say, wow, I can't believe we just discovered that person's X said A. And someone says, well, they've always said A. And you go back and you look, and the person X did say A, but they also said not A. And so it's like, yeah, you've made it such that you could never make a groundbreaking story because this person or this organization's been talking out of both sides of their mouth. So
yeah. In
any case, I want to see if you can steel man this case, though.
That's such a. It's not even. I don't. Again, I mean, common sense.
No, but we have to go beyond common sense because you got certain priors that you're bringing in, and I'm not. It's not that I disagree with you. You know, I don't disagree with you, but
no, I know.
But other people who don't have these same priors are going to be like, well, no, like they can't connect, they can't jump from A to Z like you're saying. So like, let's walk it through. And I think one way you can do that is steel man the case, because the straw man version or a less strong version, let's say, perhaps not straw man, is to say, well, Franklin, we can see your text in the window, so you're good, man. I had to shut the dogs up. All good, boss. So the less strong version of the case is that, well, banning speech doesn't lead to good things. And what people will say is, well, we're not primarily for censorship. Now, what you're saying is something like, well, in effect, you are. And there will be standards. It's a matter of what are the just standards. But before we get there, can forms of speech cause harm? Not the words themselves, but we have incitement to imminent violence, for example. That's illegal, right? So that's a form of speech that you're not advocating for. So you're for some constraints on speech, and presumably also online, yes?
Yeah, the incitement to violence, I think you can make a great case for that should be illegal, which it is, and that's perfectly fine for me. So I'm perfectly happy keeping the line there, because you want the line to be as clear and distinct as humanly possible.
Sure.
Because, I mean, I could see this. You could see this when, say, Twitter comes up and they say, well, you can't say this word because this word is a pejorative of disaffective people or whatever, and it could harm somebody. Okay. And then what started happening is that one person in Twitter would post the first letter of that word, and then somebody would catch wise and someone would post the second letter of that word. So you can see it would go down. It would just spell out the word. And then, or you could just say, okay, well, from now on, I'm going to use the word apple when I mean this type of person. I'm going to say that apple is a big whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden now everybody knows what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So by that line in the sand of being like, well, you can't say this word. It's so soft and malleable. People can get around it clearly. So incitement to violence, I think, is a pretty strong line that you can, and distinct, that you can draw.
Sure.
And so I'd say that that's probably a good
So,
starting point.
So you would say that some forms of speech constraints don't necessarily lead to bad things.
Don't necessarily lead to bad things.
Yeah, because earlier you said something like...
Right, yes.
Yeah. So, and I agree with you. But so for those who like have a caricature of the argument we're making in their head, we're trying, hopefully it's going to dispel that. I think so let's move on from this point a bit, okay? Twitter has a right as a company to moderate its platform in any way it likes, legally as well as probably ethically. It has a right to do it in any way it likes. But if it has a set of rules, to your point, those rules should be very clear and transparent, and they need to be uniformly enforced. Meaning, we can't say that Rule A applies for this group of people, but it doesn't apply for this other group of people. Would you say that's fair?
Yes.
So you need clarity and precision in your rules. So that's like 1A, 1B. And then you also need uniformity and enforcement. And if you have those two things, even if your rule set is biased, as long as you're clear and precise about it, then it can be transparently biased. And then at least people kind of know what they're getting themselves into. What these Twitter files have shown, and this is the part where I think you're dead on, which is like, it shows people what they knew was true, but that they couldn't prove. It's like the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. It's like they had a feeling that the media was kind of colluding to get Hillary Clinton to be the nominee. And then when the John Podesta, her campaign manager's emails get leaked, and there's this giant hack on the Clinton campaign, all the Bernie Sanders supporters go, wow, like we didn't need this to prove it to us, but it's nice to be able to see it like as clear as day that this was going on. And by the way, this is actually a very good appeal to like our countrymen who are maybe a little bit more left-leaning than we are. Like, this happened to you too, not long ago. These very same dynamics by a lot of the same players. High-profile administrative bureaucrat types in politics and very influential people involved in social and legacy media. So, just want to throw that out there. Okay. So let's talk about this guy, this professor who has this idea. It's the best idea I've heard so far for how you can regulate free speech online in a way that preserves what I call digital pluralism, right? Like the diversity of ideas and the free marketplace of ideas, while also allowing it to function like a market, meaning markets have to be able to clear bad actors. If they can't clear bad actors, then the market becomes corrupt, and the dynamics we rely on for allowing the best ideas or people or organizations to rise kind of they get hijacked they don't function the way they're intended to. So there's this idea of warrantying what you would do, what you put out there. So if you are a news organization or an independent journalist or just some person on Twitter, and you want to be able to have access to increasingly greater numbers of people, you want to be able to have accelerated amplification, for example. You need to have some sort of baseline credibility, but it's like, how do you tokenize? How do you discretize credibility? You can't just say, well, we're the New York Times, and by definition we're credible. That won't play for a plurality of the country, if not a majority of the country. We talked about the unpopularity of legacy media in a past episode. Happy to go into it again later, but you also can't just say that, like, well, there's no standards. Everyone starts on an equal plane, because that seems also felonious. Like, AQ 112 is the same level of credibility as Matt Taibbi, who's the same level of credibility as Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's the same level of credibility as Jake Tapper. It's like all these users have the same level of credibility to start with. There needs to be some informed prior that we can allow for updating later on. And this is actually a separate research idea I have. But to get to that research idea, I think there's this great idea of warrantying something. So Here's the story as Dr. Van Alstyne plays it out. I offer to sell you 3 bike locks. One bike lock is a very cheap chain with like a little padlock, has no warranty, no guarantee. The second bike lock is kind of like one of those things you stick in between your tires and the bike rack. It says, up to $750 guarantee, 6-month warranty. And one says and then you have like a very thick chain, a very strong padlock, and it says $20,000 guarantee and lifetime warranty. Which one of those is the strongest claim about the product? The third one, right? And so here's his postulation. And I think I have some other issues or like some disagreements with Marshall that I've raised in the way you have to do it in an academic context. He has a paper, I submit comments on his paper, etc. And hopefully we'll have that conversation later. But this particular proposal is brilliant, I think. What he says is what you allow users to do, news organizations and otherwise, is to warranty their claims. So let's use the Hunter Biden laptop story as an example. The New York Post, who breaks the story, can come out and say, here's this story that we've come across on Twitter, or that we've come across. We're going to share it on Twitter, and we're going to put, some amount of our credibility points or tokens or whatever it is behind this story. That's expressing a degree of confidence in that story. And more or less what happens is if a jury of particularly sampled Twitter users conclude that story was false and knowably misinformation or disinformation at the time, then they essentially lose that warranty. It's almost like the bike lock didn't work, and so someone claims the warranty, that $20,000 that you had posted. And so that reduces their kind of external credibility rating in a way that is adjudicated not by top-down rule makers who are making up new rules in real time, as we see in the Twitter files, but rather by a jury of the community on which the story is being shared, on the platform where the story is being shared. And if they successfully post a story and the warranty isn't claimed, then that goes to benefit them in some way. And the exact mechanisms for that are not fully explicated at this time, but we get the general idea. And so what would happen is instead of the Hunter Biden laptop story being censored because some intelligence community people went to social media and said, hey, we have evidence of hacked materials or whatever that are going to be coming out before the election, and Twitter and Facebook say, oh, hey, this must be it, and they take it down and they ban the link from being shared, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's different interventions based on different platforms. If instead of that, what they did is the New York Post says, no, we're willing to put our reputation. We're actually willing to put our reputation on the line, and not just in this way where it's like, these people can report fake news stories and nothing happens to them except for people leave them mean comments in the future. But it actually affects your ability to get access and piped into certain amplification channels on the platform. It reduces your external credibility rating, like the externally visible credibility rating. What do you think about something like that?
Well, I unfortunately had to relieve myself real quickly because my dog was barking at God only knows what out there. But so I missed a lot of what you had to say, and I'm very sorry about that.
Swell. Okay.
That's why you need wireless earbuds.
There you go. Yeah.
Ad sponsorship here.
There you go. All right, Franklin.
No.
Yeah. God, Raycons. All right, Franklin. So you were around for a lot of that. What do you think about this idea of warranting claims on social media?
Would this be like a social credit score?
It's not so much like
for media, like a social credit score for media. That's what this is, right? Essentially,
it's like a credibility score. So when I think of credit score, it's like if you do something that is wrong or that the state doesn't approve of, you get downranked. Whereas if you did something wrong in this sense, what it would mean is you posted something that you opted in to say, right? Because you can post a story without giving a warranty, or you can choose to post a story with warranty. And so you chose to warranty this story in a way that says, we stand behind this, and it was proven to be felonious, fictitious in some way. And because of that, the platform will penalize you as mediated by a community, a sampling from the community of users.
So how are they penalized?
So the idea is you would have some external facing score of a user, a Twitter user, could be an individual, could be a news organization's credibility, something like that. This is not exact, but this is roughly the idea. And it's not just an external facing score. It also has implications for whether or not you have access to certain algorithms and whether or not certain things can be amplified. So when you warranty something and it successfully clears, meaning that no one has to puts a claim on the warranty to take whatever you're staking, because you're staking some percent of your points every time you warranty it. And if you successfully put something out there, then you get like an increase in your reputation, let's say. Okay? So this increases your credibility. But if someone makes a claim, right, it's like the bike lock example. You have a bike lock that has a lifetime warranty. It fails. You send it in. You get your, whatever, $20,000 refund, or not refund, $20,000 warranty claim. That cost is borne by the company that warranted the lock. So just like the warranty helps improve the signal to noise ratio in product market, it could do it in the news market as well. So is it the social credit score? It's like, it is a credibility score, and there is like a penalty for misbehavior, let's say, but it's an opt-in thing at the level of each individual post. So the New York Post could post a story about, alien abductions one day and not warranty it. It would not be staking anything there. And they could post something about the Hunter Biden story, and it could warranty that. And what adjudicates that story is not top-down rules. As long as it doesn't violate any rules, it's allowed to go. And a community of Twitter users decide whether or not it's false or, violative in some way.
So let's run through an experiment. Let's assume that let's implement this idea,
Okay.
and just run through the COVID saga and the people that broke news. So what would their scores look like? How would it go up and down? Because I don't know if I'm quite understanding this. As I do understand it, it sounds like as long as the majority of people out there didn't like what you had to say, they just give you a bad score. And for the person that said, hey, I think this might come from a lab, they would just have a terrible score and they would have no credit. Is that correct? Or walk me through it.
Right. Also, quick question. Would it be fair to say that the majority of the media is left-leaning?
I mean, it really depends. Like, this is a tough spot for me to be in because I want to be able to point to objective data on this. There is reasonable evidence that a lot of the academic programs that journalists go through have a ideological bent that comes out of a particular set of schools that are lend themselves to being left-leaning, and that since kind of the 1960s-ish, legacy media has become increasingly so, or has been demonstrated as more left-leaning than not. One moment, just one moment. Pick it up from here, Sam. I'll be right back. Hey, Sarah?
Because I couldn't figure out any difference there, Franklin. It seemed to me that all it would be is the majority of people that didn't like what you had to say, or it doesn't even. Maybe it's not even the majority of people. Maybe it's it could be the amount of people that are willing to engage with this score and maybe give you a bad score or interact with you. Mm-hmm. Could just be a bunch of people that are mad at what you have to say. So it doesn't even have to be the majority. So I'm not so sure this system would hold out as I understand it.
So here's the thing. Really quickly, thank you for picking up, by the way. David, we see your questions. Definitely we'll get to those in just one moment once we kind of clear this up for us. So the first thing I should say is that this is not, that no intervention is error-free. So this is in statistics, we call it a type 1 versus type 2 error thing. Type 1 error is something like, am I determining that something that could be free speech is actually should be subject to censorship? And am I making that decision in error? As in, it's actually should have not been subject to censorship. And a type 2 error would be the inverse of that, which is to say something like, okay, this is something that I chose not to censor that I should have. Okay, so any intervention will make one of those errors or potentially both. And the question is, how much of one error, how frequently is one error allowed versus another error? So like in our judicial system, we say beyond a reasonable doubt. So people would say something like, it's better for, 99 criminals to go free than one innocent person to be convicted. All right, that's balancing of type 1 and type 2 errors. And so the question is, how do we balance? Like, what's the appropriate balance here? And I think each of us have probably our own position on that. It's probably pretty similar to American case law and what we would argue is natural law as well. But that doesn't, I'm not putting the warranty idea forward because I think it's perfect, because I don't think that there's a perfect solution. Even the free speech maximalist position would inevitably allow things to be up that none of the three of us want to be up. And you can say, well, what that does is it drives one of those errors to zero. And it's true. Just like the maximally censorious position drives the other one to zero. So,
but the question is, I mean, we could just run a thought experiment. So if you are going to go take an extreme, minimizing one of those errors all the way to zero, which one would produce, which one would be favorable? Which one would, even though maybe not, I mean, obviously they're not 100% favorable, but which would you prefer?
Yeah, obviously I would rather there be speech than no speech, but that's not, I mean, that's neither extreme is a realistic position for a commercial company.
No, but my point is being, yes, it's true. Not that neither extreme is okay, but if you're going to pick a direction, pick one to make smaller than the other. That's a good starting point.
Yeah, you're saying you'd rather have, if it's an unclear or ambiguous situation, you would tend towards not censoring the speech.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So your example of the COVID. So here's my rule for COVID. I think I mentioned this during the last live stream. I'm a data junkie. Science can evolve. Like, our understanding of science can evolve over time. That's fine. But for me, until about 5 years have passed, until about 2024, 2025, I'm not going to make any hard and fast judgments about the scientific claims about where the virus came from, its pathology, effective interventions, in a way that I think is like, in the same way that I would make declarative statements about, the junk science that implicit bias research is, largely. Because there's just so much that we don't know, that we didn't know early on, where people were pretending like they did know. There's so many social and political pressures against certain narratives. And there's also a lot of people whose training I don't actually trust, who are pushing some of these narratives. And so, like, to me, it's just a giant bundle of signal noise. I can't delineate between the two in a way that I feel like comfortable making declarative statements going on. That's not the same thing as saying, by the way, and this is where we can have this conversation, I think, where we can make claims about what was knowable at the time. We do have some evidence. We do have some bearing for that. So you said something like, rather than the claim of someone saying, oh, okay, well, this came from a wet market. Let's take the simpler example for now, because I don't think we can answer that question even now. Did it come from a wet market? Did it come from a lab? And are those two things even mutually exclusive, by the way? Because there's scenarios one can think of where they're not mutually exclusive. So is
crossover.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, well, are there, rather than trying to make a claim about the origin of the pandemic, in terms of where the virus came from, let's say that instead what someone said in in February of 2020, someone said, hey, there's this Wuhan Institute of Virology. They studied bat coronaviruses there. It seems like this could have come from a lab. And Twitter says that's medical misinformation. It's not from an authoritative voice like the CDC or the World Health Organization. We're going to take that down. That's roughly kind of what happened. Yes. But that person said something like, it could have come from a lab. They didn't say it did. They said it could have. So let's take that claim and how it gets adjudicated. Okay? Let's assume that they're let's make it even easier. They're a credentialed doctor, medical doctor, and they could be, a practitioner of medicine, or they could be a researcher. For this thought experiment, it doesn't matter. And they say something like, hey, I write, I do original research, and I review papers for journals, and I kind of have my own little kind of blog type thing that I write for, and I want to stake 10% of my credibility on this.
How does he have credibility though? If it's a small blog,
Well,
I
what you
thought
would
this
do
was
is
the thing for legacy media.
yeah, well, so it's not just for legacy media. The thing is
Okay.
you have to be able to. One thing that this warranty thing does is it allows. It doesn't have some of the structural disadvantages for smaller or new entrants that some of the other interventions do, where they overly rely on legacy, authority, and prestige. So rather than say, how do they have credibility? They're not from legacy media. What we would say is something like, is there some initial pot of credibility, some initial credibility seed that each account starts with, each verified Twitter user, right? So they can verify that you're a real person or real organization, and you have whatever, 100 or 1,000 currency to play with. And maybe you give some additional, like, maybe it's 25,000 for the New York Times to start with, or whatever it is for legacy media, or for authoritative sources, what have you. And what you do is you say, okay, well, like, you allow the market dynamics to play out over time. And so let's say that this person had, they said, I want to stake 10% of my. Who would moderate point distribution? So this would just be a policy platform thing. It would be something like, by virtue of the fact that you're a verified user on Twitter, like just meaning an authentic user, you would incur a certain number of points. And then how do you moderate whether people gain or lose it? What happens, this is how it happens. I say COVID could have come from a lab. This gets flat, and I say I want to warranty this claim. I'm putting 10% of my credibility on the line. Franklin and Sam each have make a claim on mine. They want to claim what I'm putting out there. They're saying we want to split his 10% credibility by essentially demonstrating that this is false in some way. And what you would do is you'd then go to a jury of your peers. So Sam, this was to your question earlier. David, this is to your question now, which is like, how does this get adjudicated? And my point here is not that it's perfect, but that by having a sufficiently large and representative sample ideologically from Twitter users, vet the claim, and setting the benchmark for the claim being justly removed from the claim, the person making the claim, meaning you and Franklin do get to split the credibility that I've posted, right? So it's a demerit on my end, and it's to your benefit. What that then does is it says, like, you can set that arbitrarily high. You could set it at just 51.49. We're sure that this is false, or you'd probably move the bar to something like we're 95% sure that this is false. So what you would then need is you would need your community to reach a consensus at 95%, right? Something like 19-1, that the claim I put out is false or violative in some way. And if that was to happen, then I would lose that 10% credibility. It would be split amongst the people who made the claim, who put the claim against me. And if I were to be able to stand up in the face of the claims made against me, that goes to my benefit.
What about over time?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say we decide to, our peers come in and they say, 20-0, that's false. But then over time, that number starts to shrink, and the percentages go up. I mean, like, how, at this point, does anybody really care about you or your social credit or your trust, I guess? Because it seemed to me that in the beginning, had you made that claim, you would have been, whatever the term is, deratioed, and then
you would have lost your warranty.
You would have lost you. Yeah, but over time, I mean, you'd have it back now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Conceivably.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I agree that, again, there's
Quick question.
no.
Would this be like a blockchain thing where we would, so if you publish the article and then Sam and I called you out on this,
Mm-hmm.
we would get those credibility points
Right.
to our name.
Right.
So it would be like a blockchain, right? Like a coin,
So you could do it that way.
essentially.
Yeah, you could potentially do it that way. Or it doesn't even necessarily have to be a coin on the chain. You could just use blockchain to make things like immutable, right? So
Points, right.
if I said something like, God, yeah, I just thought about the fact that we were talking about COVID and lab leak and all this stuff, and it's a YouTube live stream. It's very funny. No, I make the claim that, let's say that my original claim was
Demonetized.
COVID was a bioweapon, and it came from a lab, and I lose my warranty, right, in February or March of 2020, and now it's December of 2022. And I go back in and I stealth edit like some people in legacy media do to make things a little bit more ambiguous. And I say, oh, I didn't say it was a bioweapon. I said it could have come from a lab at the time. And so what blockchain would help us do is it would help provide that immutable record, right? So that would be a very useful benefit of that technology. David Nash from freedomcast.locals.com. And we can see about getting people the link. That'd be good. Sorry, just very quickly. Your point about overtime is fine. There is, I can't make a claim on my bike lock malfunction, like not doing its job, if my bike hasn't been stolen, right? So there needs to be an instant, like there is something to this idea of like there is a singularity where there's an inflection point where you can go from not being able to evaluate a claim to actually being able to evaluate a claim. But it's up to the person who's putting the warranty out there. Remember, it's opt-in. I don't have to warranty everything I say, but it's to my benefit. What you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce the disparity for liars versus truth tellers, because right now there's relatively little costs online to be a liar, because it's so cheap to produce false stories, right? And as long as you don't get caught up in the censorship, you can flood the zone with lies. But it's a lot harder to do like actual reporting, for example. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to increase the reward for telling the truth, so that the disparity between those two is reduced. And so I don't have to warranty everything I say. But if I choose to, what I'm willing to do is say, at least at the time I made this claim, I'm willing to stand behind it, and I feel sufficiently strong that I can do this. Now, you might say something like, well, in the case where you wrongfully convict someone, we don't say, well, we originally convicted you, that's all we can do, and yeah, sure, this DNA evidence exonerates you now, but you've already been convicted. So you would want to have some sort of mechanism for redress. I agree with you. So it's not perfect in and of itself, but just as an alternative to the top-down version of this, I think it stands up very well. And I think it aligns the incentives properly. You want to improve I think about all the independent media people we follow, right-wing, left-wing, centrist, whatever, just heterodox people who would benefit from this, because they could not have artificial suppression or deranking or deboosting or caricaturing of their positions if they were able to warranty what they say and they can stand behind it. And so I think that in that way, it not only levels the field between liars and truth tellers, it levels the field between people who've been given the social distinction of authoritative versus those who have not, because you're allowing those who have not to become authoritative. Sorry. So we have a couple questions. I want to throw them to you guys. Can you come back from the grave? What happens if you stake all your points and lose them? Yeah, you would essentially probably have to be involved in the discourse or in the process of evaluating other people's claims. So like you would say, oh, hey, this person made a false claim. I'm going to help demonstrate that claim is false. And you would get some % of their warranty. That's one way you could come back from the grave. From Sarah, the credibility tool you were describing, how do you account for journalists who write opinion pieces or those who write both news and opinion? So this is, again, it's at the level of the individual Twitter user. That could be an organization, or it could be a journalist, or it can just be a random user. They can opt in to warranty their claims, and they don't have to warranty all their claims, just a single one. So if you write an editorial, don't warranty it. It's your opinion. I mean, and that's what it's supposed to be, right? We're supposed to be able to say, hey, we can separate factual pieces from opinions, and this would also help clear that up too, because essentially what you'd have people do most likely is not warranting a whole lot of their opinion pieces, or their what they would claim are news pieces, but really it's their opinions masquerading as news. Because there's a potential risk that if they do warranty those things, that they would lose whatever they warranty.
So I'm skeptical of this. I'm not saying that it's a terrible idea, but I'm skeptical because I'm thinking there are several attack vectors that will be focused on to spread a shitty message or to screw with the system or do something, because I think that's just somebody on the internet's going to do it. Like, for example, I could be just some Joe Schmo on Twitter, and maybe I'm somewhat clairvoyant, meaning like I think it comes from the lab, or it could be, and I'm fairly certain that China's doing something nefarious, and I don't know, I've got all these tiny claims that I think are gonna turn out to be true. I could stake my reputation, whatever it could be, my point system, and over time I could just get a ton. I could just be guessing, and maybe I'm like super credible now.
Yeah.
And then I could be like, aha, I've got this giant amount of clout, and I want to, some person at some other news media wronged me, and so I'm going to be like, this person plays with little kids, and I'm going to stake my reputation on it.
Well, if you stake your reputation on it, there's a cost to you.
Well, but then how many people would believe me because I have such a strong reputation?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, so I see.
Would you have to? You would have to have evidence, though. You would go out there, I think, right?
I didn't have evidence to call the COVID thing, and I could have just said it. I could have said, hey, it could be, and I stake a ton of points on it, and then it happens to be true. And I could say, hey, I think Hunter Biden is probably doing something weird over in Ukraine, and turns out that was true. And I could say, hey, I think Joe Biden is sniffing little kids. Turns out that's true. I mean,
yeah, there are people who play roulette who put it all on 00 and win 5 times in a row. Yeah. But they eventually go bankrupt. That's the only way to play. But they go bankrupt eventually.
But they could take the money that before they go bankrupt, they could take all that money that they have and cause harm with it before they go bankrupt.
So that's what you're talking about is like walking away from the table. So I think the stronger version of what you're saying is you make a series of 5 100% claims, and so now what is that? You go from 100 to 200, 200 to 400, 400 to 800, 800 to 1600. You're not 3,200 credibility points, whatever it is.
Sure.
And now from now on, you don't stake any claims. You just say, I'm in the top 1% of most credible users on Twitter. I'm not going to stake anything. Right?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, because like now you have no risk in terms of what you're saying. But that's okay. I mean,
then I could, exactly. I could make a claim but not stake anything, and people would be like, well, his track record's pretty good.
Yeah, but the thing is, what you're trying to do, you're trying to provide with the warranty claim, what it's trying to do is provide a signal about the message that's being posted there. And so the idea is that in general, over time, it's not just one's credibility score, which may or may not be externally facing, probably should be, but also the presence or absence of a claim associated with it. So if I'm a company and I have a great reputation, I'm an auto manufacturer, I'm Tesla, right? And my batteries have a, whatever it is, 15-year warranty. I have no idea. And then starting in 2024, I offer no warranty on my batteries. And I had a great reputation, right? Mm-hmm. Almost no one made that claim on my batteries before 15 years. Well, all of a sudden, the market is going to respond to that absence of a warranty on the batteries in a way that is, it's
your
like
stock would crash.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be.
It wouldn't crash, but you would lose a lot of value.
What you're trying to do with this warranty idea is turn the free marketplace of ideas into a market, essentially.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me. You seeing it as a market.
Yeah, and so if you
stock market makes more sense.
Right, and so it's like, again, it goes back to this type 1 versus type 2 error thing, because yes, there are ways you could abuse it, but the question is, on balance and in keeping with, let's say, U.S. case law and natural rights, on balance, are the errors less costly and less systematically biased?
So I think I'm skeptical because free speech is the marketplace of ideas. Theoretically, if we're speaking in theoretical terms right now, it is. And when you make this point system its own economy, its own market, I guess, then that the currency is now points. The focus is less on points and more on, or is less on the free exchange of ideas and finding out the truth, and more of just like who was right, I was right, you were wrong, sort of stuff. And I think it's slightly off. Now I get that you warrant a claim and the amount of points is staked on the truth of that claim based on facts. I understand that. But I'm thinking that the free exchange of ideas and someone's reputation, like that already exists in an ideal form of free speech. It's a free exchange of ideas. It's the marketplace of ideas. Mm-hmm. That already exists. And so I think what is trying to be done here is taking something that's already ideal and something that we already should be striving for and changing it in such a way that doesn't need to be changed. It's like you're now but hang on, let me just clarify what I don't mean by that. I'm not saying that let's say Twitter is perfect and ideal space for free speech. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that something does not need to be fixed there. Mm-hmm. But I'm speaking in if we're trying to aim at the best system is free speech. And so I think it's kind of like fixing something that's not broken. Again, like I said, I understand that as it stands now, the Twitter space is broken. So I'm skeptical. I'm not saying it's a terrible idea. I'm not so sure that I would be on board.
So, well, the counterfactual is not an abstract world where everyone is erudite and engaged in reasoned discourse. The counterfactual is the current state of Twitter, or the state of Twitter under the old regime.
But you already kind of have this with just someone's reputation, you know.
But again, you have a reputation. You have a sense of Dennis Prager's reputation and how well you hold him in high regard. But other people have a different sense of that. And it's like, okay, it's not just like a product, like, oh, I value, imported cars and you value traditional American muscle cars. It's not quite like a preference. It's much more like do I trust you to actually deliver a good product? Do I trust you to be honest with the information and relay it effectively? And right now what's happening is like, we can say people have reputations, but what's being done kind of subversively, or what was being done subversively, is that certain people were allowed to have reputations, and this goes back to that Tower of Tautologies idea, which maybe we'll get to at some point, which is the rules of the road are being set up in a way that certain people's credibility is granted to them by virtue of the fact that they have credibility granted to them. And that's not a reputation. That's like an anointing of of those who are beyond reproach. At least this point system allows you to say, no, we can correct for things where, like, if the World Health Organization, like it did in January 2020, comes out and says that Chinese scientists claim that there's no evidence of human-to-human transmission for SARS-CoV-2, and like puts this message out there, it's like, no. That is a claim that, if it were subject to this warranty thing, would help clear the market by penalizing this authoritative source in a way that they won't currently be penalized now. It's like, oh, well, what happens when Dr. Fauci got this wrong, or he admits to lying about masks? It's like, oh, the science changed. Well, it's not gain-of-function research because we redefined gain-of-function research. It's like, well, I think the counterfactual, respectfully, is that you have a system of unfalsifiable incentives and rules that can be made up ad hoc and developed in a biased manner such that the actual signal by someone's reputation doesn't shine through. Even though I agree with you, in the abstract and in some objective sense, there is some underlying reputation for each of these actors. I don't think that that's the current social standing that governs social media.
So okay, we don't have to stay on this hypothetical situation for forever, because I don't want to just be here the one trying to poke holes in the system. Because, like I said, I don't even. I'm not saying that it's a bad system.
Sure.
But I also foresee a scenario where let's say this thing gets implicated in Twitter, and then all of a sudden, certain people on Twitter have this high reputation. a lot of people that are outside of Twitter or don't want to be on Twitter are just like, well, who's Twitter to say that these people are truthful? And I don't think they are truthful. And then it's sort of, it might drive people away from this free exchange of ideas. So I think I do think I do think it's actually a pretty good idea. It's quite clever and interesting. But I think ultimately what it's doing is it's fixing something that needs not being fixed. It needs to be, it doesn't need to be fixed. I think that's the best way to put it.
Do you think that the form of the marketplace of ideas that for which you advocate is possible on social media?
The ideal version, probably not.
Okay. A version better than this?
Could be. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, like I can't think of one now, but so okay, well, let me go ahead.
So would it be better for you, Sam, if, like, let's say if Twitter published everything that they censored on a separate page, if you could look through everything that's been censored, would that help?
Look through everything that's been censored?
You know, like, if you could publish stuff, but there would be like a dark Twitter where all the stuff that is being censored gets sent to.
Yeah, so I
public.
Yeah, so I heard someone make a suggestion for a form of Twitter that was like that implemented like KYC rules, like know your customer, where each person is, if you want to engage, if you want to be taken seriously on Twitter, then you should have your name and verified who you are. And I'm not saying your address, but definitely you need to have some sort of something. You need to have some sort of stake in the game. Like your identity, your reputation needs to be in the game. But if you don't want that, you could be on dark Twitter. You could be anonymous, and then you and a million other anonymous people can talk about whatever you want. And there could be, you could bounce between dark Twitter and the people who actually have things to stake, meaning their identity, their reputation. And it's kind of like this point system, except there's no points. And then you're sort of just peeling that off. And it's just Samuel Vernon of, this person who, I probably wouldn't put addresses or anything like that, but know your customer laws. This person is claiming this and blah, 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 blah. So I have heard that being offered, and that's kind of like what you're saying, like the dark Twitter and all this. So I'm not opposed to that.
I think we should all just go back to meeting in town squares, fighting stuff out. We have beef, or cigar bars. Great place to talk.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think that is not mutually exclusive with the still communicating on digital platforms, as well as the idea of, Sam, I don't think that having a, kind of a safe sandbox version of Twitter for people with particular sensibilities versus one where people who actually want to get along with the business of collective sense making, I think you could do both those. But in that one word, collective sense making, we have to consider the fact that there are not just bad actors who are like trying to censor other people. There are also bad actors who genuinely are putting out information that is designed to distort people's ability to tell what's true. And I think this warranty thing, what it does is, like I said, it reduces the how cheap it is to put out lies versus how costly it is to develop something that's true, by increasing the reward for people who can successfully put truth together, and making it so that there's a public-facing incentive for people to a public-facing mechanism so that people can get a sense for, hey, this person seems like they're putting out lies. Like I could think about, like I have my own, potential areas I can fall into confirmation bias, and I would like for it to be a situation where if I saw Twitter user X saying a lot of stuff I agree with, I could message them and say, why don't you ever warranty these claims? You know what I mean? Like, this seems like really good kind of inside information. Can we not, like, get some additional insight here? Like, you should pick up traction. You should be more well known. And if they're averse to doing so, that could indicate that, oh, okay, maybe they don't actually have their stuff together as much as they're indicating. So just very quickly, we do have a couple questions. So David, you asked who would moderate the point distribution. We talked about that being kind of a more policy decision. Could more points be allocated for larger companies who put out more articles? It's not so much the size of the company, though certainly if you warranty more things successfully, you have the potential for both greater loss and greater gain. It's like betting with more money. And there was one more question.
Can I interject for a second? Yeah. I also see, because you're adding this economy in there, there's what's to stop someone from bribing the CEO of Twitter to give me more points, under the table? Sure. You're adding a layer that's susceptible to a lot more attacks that
that's
could be
now.
Yeah, that's why it should be a blockchain, right? Yeah. Because we could limit the number of points that are out in the system.
I certainly think blockchain would
could see where the points are. An open blockchain.
Yeah. I do agree with you. I certainly believe that having an open sourced blockchain type system would solve the currency stuff.
So really quickly, it just occurred to me, some people listening might not know what we mean by blockchain, and it's also a buzzword. So what we mean by that is it's something like a digital, publicly traceable ledger that it cannot be manipulated post facto. So it only is updated in organic fashion as these mechanisms play out. So this idea that all of a sudden someone introduces a whole bunch more credibility points into the system to favor a particular actor or set of actors, that would be detectable by all users in the system. And you could even make it such that structurally it would be precluded. You couldn't do that.
Yeah, I certainly think the blockchain would help.
Yes.
But I'm still. I mean, that's fine. Look, I don't mind being the one person who's skeptical of this. But
we're all skeptical. I don't even know if you're actually against it. I think you're maybe against it in the abstract. You're also not on social media a ton. So relative to what's available, we'll see. Like I said, it's the best idea I've heard that doesn't how do I say this? It's the least bad idea I've heard. Let's put it that way.
And I also know that if there was just open free speech, anything goes, you would certainly have a lot of bad actors, and you would certainly have a lot of people lying and building up trust with their lies as more and more people believe in crazy stuff. But having it open would the having it open like that would lead towards the truth coming out. And I'm just afraid that putting a system in place could prioritize these points in such a way that the truth is no longer the best thing to rise to the top, and instead it's the person with the most points.
Yeah. And it's Goodhart's law. So once a measure of success, once a measure becomes the optimization parameter, right? So you have some proxy for success, and now you optimize for that proxy. Well, it's not exactly success. It's a proxy for it. Once you do that, the statistical properties that allowed that measure to correlate with success break down, because you've now changed the landscape in such a way that relationship is broken. So I agree with you. But at the same time, yes, and that'll be very favorable for Dr. Van Alstyne, because he comes from an economics background anyway. Let's put it that way. At the same time, currency encodes for value in a way that's much more efficient than bartering, right? And it's more scalable. So that's kind of what the adaptation is here.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now that's interesting, because the reason why we take the dollar or or anything else as a currency. I
Mhm.
mean, it's a store of value, but I don't know. It'd be very interesting to think if you could. How could you take that, put that into a store of value? I don't know. I'm working that out. That's tough. I don't know if I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, we can move on. 'Cause
Okay.
I don't know.
Franklin, you got anything else you want to say about this before we?
No, I mean it's a very difficult topic. The whole implementation thing of how the system would work is just mind-boggling. I mean, how do you implement this across different countries against different languages? Would
Yes.
this only apply to American media? What about foreign media that wants to comment on American media, like on American news sources, like
Yeah.
topics?
Yeah. There's definitely the as you move from the abstract to the practical, there's a lot more considerations that have to go into place, and each of those considerations have to align with the overall set of incentives you're trying to set up at the abstract level. Otherwise, there's going to be a giant disconnect somewhere between the idea and the implementation. So, last thing to David Najm's point, where he says, "Sounds like ex-Twitter moderators would be perfect for this." One thing I want to point out here is, like, I think that there's maybe some cynicism, understandably so, in this comment, is that this would be community based. And so, is it perfect? The answer is no, of course not. But I think that a lot of the public-facing people in these big tech companies have done a disservice to a lot of the people working behind the scenes in terms of the general public trust in what they do and how they do it. I have some insight on how these algorithms they train and develop and deploy work. So I know it's not an easy job. And I know that there's a lot of technical trade-offs in enormous amounts of data that they're dealing with. But I have axiomatically a pro-human orientation that says something like, I think it's just that the community of users who use a platform should be the jury that serves for adjudicating these claims. I trust that system more over time to make less catastrophic errors than having an anointed round table of experts.
I agree with that statement there. I certainly think that this system that we're talking about now is better than the old Twitter. I would agree with you, but I think that the new Twitter, if Elon, I mean, this again, I don't think that Elon is actually doing everything perfectly, and there's a lot of stuff that I think he's doing that I would do differently, but making things as transparent as possible and minimizing what gets censored, and then whatever is against the rules needs to be, like we discussed in the beginning, clearly defined and evenly
uniformly applied.
Uniformly applied.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think that's probably the best system.
Yeah, I think
in an ideal world.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And just so you know, people, I've put the slideshow that discusses this, as well as I believe about 8 or 9 other proposals. He's got 6 core proposals and a handful that he kind of like says these are potential ideas, but they don't work for certain misalignment of incentive reasons. So I put that slideshow as well as his working paper, at least the version from earlier this spring, in the chat window. So feel free to download them there. They're public facing. I think you can get to the paper without going through a paywall. If people are curious about my feedback to that paper, I'd be happy to discuss those bullet points at like an, kind of at the level of idea as opposed to the level of what I actually wrote, because I want to respect the process of refining a paper. But I do hope to talk to Dr. Van Alstyne. He's one of the 20-25 people I hope to talk to next year about this fake news problem. I think he's got very interesting ideas. This is just one of them. Another one is that he takes a very different philosophical approach to this problem, and that he and I actually, I think, disagree immensely politically. But it's interesting that we have kind of convergence on the set of solutions that are actually likely to be successful, and in a way that does not offend either of our sensibilities politically, let's say. So
all right, I've got a question.
Go ahead.
So I'm curious what both of you think. What would happen if on every single social media platform, every bit of content moderation was lifted. And let's even say, let's keep it within the realms of
I think it would be like a
the law.
Modern Warfare 2 chat room. If you ever played Modern Warfare 2 back in the day.
Okay, but
where
yeah,
like there were no rules. You could say whatever the heck you wanted.
Yeah.
And you had some interesting conversations with people.
Yeah. So understood. But I think that's narrow. So broaden it out a bit. Like over time, what do you think the landscape would look like if let's leave it. Let's put aside all the social media platforms. Let's just look at Twitter. If Twitter lifted everything and said there's no content moderation, you're free to say whatever. So what do you think the evolution would look like? And what do you think what do you think would happen? Let's just go there.
I think that for like the first week, you would get a lot of shit posting.
Yep.
But I think it would mellow out after a first week or a first month. It would start to mellow out, and you'd get more curated content to what you're looking for.
I think what would happen is, I think you're kind of on par there, or I would agree with you. I think in the beginning bits, you would have a ton of shit posting, a lot of probably criminal posting, a lot of bad actors in there doing stuff. Yeah. But then I think what would happen is people would select the things that they want to listen to, and they would maybe get that shit out of their system, or they would just say, hey, that's childish. I kind of want to get better. Similar to how, what is it that Jordan Peterson talks about? Like, maybe 95% of you has to die, but
at
all the deadwood
at the level of the individual. Like within an individual, 95% of like your old beliefs have to die off.
That's funny.
Good
that's
Lord,
funny. Yeah,
Sam.
Cause that's hilarious. That's hilarious. No. I make that joke. Or sorry, I misspoke there only because I never associate what Jordan Peterson had to say with mass genocide.
Sure,
so it didn't even occur to me. So okay, what I meant, what he meant, and I should obviously be more careful with my speech, is so maybe the landscape of ideas isn't all that it is cracked up to be here now, but it's possible that a lot of the bad actors and that sort of stuff needs to be free to sink to the bottom such that the best stuff rises up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that probably would be the case if everything was lifted. And so I think
maybe.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a verified user system would help us out a lot. If I'm not sure how they would go about this process, but if you had to have a picture of your face on there, you had to have your real name,
your customer. Yeah. KYC.
Yeah.
But hold up. Is there value in anonymity? What if you're a whistleblower? Right? What if you have something that you need to say, right? And it's like, okay, well, if you have something you need to say, put your name behind it. It's like, because that's going back to the warranty thing, kind of, right? Like, your reputation's on the line. To get to your point, Sam, to your point,
right.
Franklin.
Yeah.
But it's like, should someone have to risk life and livelihood?
Well, I think there would be a system there. If I'm a whistleblower, I could go into anonymous Twitter and post it.
Okay.
And then what would happen is if this thing is worth spreading and it's a good enough idea, then somebody who has their face posted and is putting the reputation on the line would be like, oh, yep, hey, guess what? This is what's happening, and I'm going to post this on real Twitter, and it would go out. So I think it could still happen.
So
really quickly from the chat, we have Silo is back.
Silo, welcome.
So,
glad to see you back here.
Welcome back, Silo.
Silo.
So we haven't actually gone in
Also,
too deeply into the specific Twitter files. So you haven't missed much there. We've just been kind of banting back and forth different social media policies, which is good. This is an excellent conversation.
We'll get there in the next 2 hours.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Also, David said that it would be like 4chan.
Yeah, I do think that there's something to that. The idea that you could flood the zone with a lot of nonsense. I do, for example, I agree with you guys that, and this is something that I've indicated, I think, Sam, on your episode where we crossed over with each other. Check out From Is to Ought and Conventional Wisdom, our two most recent episodes, just crossover, interviewing one another. But we said something like, what the economic rationalist doesn't appreciate about the necessary mechanism of free speech is that it takes time for the free speech market to clear. Yeah. And so, yeah, sure, you might, in any short interval, you might quote unquote reduce harm, but over the long term, you're creating a set of incentives that will allow for much greater harm there later on, in addition to violating people's natural rights at the time. So there's that. But also, there is something to this idea of let's just say, the Russian collusion conversation didn't live up to the billing. That's all I'm going to say about that with respect to Donald Trump and the Russian collusion thing. It's not like he acted well, but it's also not like he acted like we were told he acted. And there's been a lot of negative consequences of media dishonesty around that. But that doesn't mean that Russia did well. So I fully expect Russia and Iran and China and others to try and influence our elections as we do theirs. And I have no doubt they will use lies and half-truths to do so. And the question is, well, okay, what happens when they lay dormant for 3.5 years and then the 6 months leading up to an election, they start flooding the zone with lies and all this stuff? Is there enough time for that market to clear? I don't know what the answer to that is. I suspect probably not.
I suspect as well.
You suspect? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, very good. Do we want to move on to particular aspects of the Twitter files?
We can. We certainly can.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to start with a particular dump, 1 through 4, or do we want to just jump into number 4?
I would say let's do number 4.
Okay. All right. Again, this is from Mike Schellenberger tonight. I will drop this in the chat window I keep doing that, in the chat box here. So this is from Mike Schellenberger, his tweet thread. And
I wish you would number them like Taibbi did.
Yes. Tien, I don't know if we're going to be able to answer that question for you, but
what's the question?
Elon Musk question: how to make CNT borofine ceramic non-silicon padding 10 nanometer processors. So I suspect this is more of like a microchip question. Fascinating. It's just beyond our scope. But we hope you stick around and ask further questions. So
I could answer that.
I'm sorry. Engineer. Sam is an engineer, so.
Actually, I didn't hear the question, but it sounded complex, so I'm not sure I can answer it.
All right. So let's start reading this. I'm going to bring it up. You guys won't be able to see it unless you're also simultaneously on the live stream. Those of you on the live stream should see this, but my contemporaries in the video won't. But again, they can look here. So Twitter Files Part 4, the removal of Donald Trump, January 7th. And let's start down here. For those catching up, Part 1, Matt Taibbi documents how Twitter execs violated their own policies to prevent the spread of accurate information about Hunter Biden laptop. What you'll see is that in that data dump there is that there was a lot of post hoc rationalization and making up of rules and criteria in real times to justify a decision that they wanted to make, despite the laptop being at least largely true, or at least some of the most relevant information being true. Barry Weiss talks about this de-amplification, these blacklists that applied to trends and users, including a few different people. So let's talk about that for just a second. The disfavored users thing, this is the media is saying, oh, wow, everyone who's supporting Elon Musk is a hypocrite because Elon Musk talked about de-amplifying. De-amplifying is a euphemism for censoring, for throttling the reach. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to say it, but it's saying something like speech doesn't equal reach. Means, yeah, you can say things, but people don't necessarily don't have to be presented with what you're saying. So what Elon Musk is proposing is he's saying that, in particular, certain types of tweets will be throttled, whereas what Barry Weiss showed was that this applied to not just tweets, but users as well. I think that, I don't know if this was part 1 or part 2, but Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's a medical researcher and doctor from Stanford, I think he was a part of the Great Barrington Declaration. Anyway, he was part of one of these blacklisted people, very well credentialed. I mean, is it Stanford, for Christ's sake? I mean, it's about as good as you get. And their point, or his point anyway, was something like total lockdowns will have negative consequences for children. That was one of their points. And, he was blacklisted for this. And of course, now with the benefit of 2 years of hindsight, he was proven unquestionably correct on that point. So again, de-amplified for unjust reasons that turned out to not only be unjust, but also untrue. Part 3, Matt Taibbi documents how they censored Trump in the run up to the election. And the most important thing here was how they were engaging with representatives of the U.S. government, meaning these leadership at these social media platforms were regularly meeting with people from places like, I'm sure, the FBI or DHS to talk about evolving threats online and kind of what risks of potential Russian disinformation or what have you were being put out there. Not that that's not a trivial thing, but we've seen how that can be falsely weaponized. And for those who are curious, sorry about that, there's also Li Fang and Klippenstein. I can't remember his first name. Ken, maybe? Klippenstein? From The Intercept. They wrote a great article about a month ago talking about how the DHS, who tried to put together this disinformation governance board, has essentially still been in back channel communication with a lot of these social media programs to work to regulate what people see online. So if anyone thinks this is a partisan point, just know that The Intercept is about as left-wing as it gets as a publication. All right, so what happens here is that Donald Trump doesn't behave perfectly on January 6th, to say the least. Has some things he says badly, has some things that people of convenience forgot he said, or pretend like he didn't say, with regard to forcefully and peacefully. They ignore the peacefully part, but obviously the stuff that happened on January 6th was atrocious. The stuff that happened at the Capitol on January 6th was atrocious, though that was not the only thing that happened on January 6th. And so what Michael Schellenberger here is documenting is what was going on behind the scenes that week, the couple days before, as well as up to the couple days after. So for context, he talks about how he points out to something that Matt Taibbi pointed to during the first Twitter drop, which was that upwards of 90% of Twitter staff donations, as with big tech donations in general, went to Democrats in that election cycle. So this is that's not proof in of itself, that's circumstantial evidence, but it does indicate a particular ideological alignment. Yoel Roth, he had these tweets. Yes, that person in the pink hat, this is from 2017, is clearly a bigger threat to your brand of feminism than actual Nazis in the White House, referring to the Trump administration. And then in 2022, he said, academia is by far the most abusive working environment I've ever been in. The entire system is exploitive in so many ways, and also not necessarily productive if your goal is to drive change in the world, which is the main reason I left. Now, I have some sympathies with that. I think that's a fair statement. But again, trying to drive change in the world that is not, in a way that is not epistemically humble, can result in what we've seen here. So before we kind of go on, Sam, Franklin, do you guys want to talk about anything we've seen so far? Or tee anything out that we're going to see?
No, I'm good.
Let me see. Let's see. Because I was sort of reading across. It seems like, just reading through all these tweets, does it seem like Jag really had no say in anything? and that really the people running Twitter was Roth and Vijaya?
So Yoel Roth and Vijaya Gotti seemed like they had much more to do with the day-to-day operations of Twitter, and much more prominent roles in the adjudication of high-profile moderation decisions than did Jack Dorsey. That seems to be the case so far.
Do we think is this a situation where Jack had other things to do and he delegated these issues?
Well,
and, they were kept away from him, or is this a thing where Jack just said, "Do what you will"?
So
kind of
I was,
like
I forget which of the number it was or which tweet it was, but there was an example I remember reading where Jack had sent a message like, "Hey, we're gonna do this," and then you could tell by the text. It seemed like people were like, "Jack said this, but like should we talk to these people?" So it even seemed like within Twitter, some directive coming from Jack didn't hold near as much weight as a directive coming from these other people.
Is that from tonight's dump?
I I think I read it from this
Okay,
tonight's
then
dump. Yeah,
let's wait to
I'm gonna try and
speculate
find
till we
it.
get there. Yeah,
I'm gonna try and find it. Hang on.
yeah. But
Go ahead.
Franklin, yeah, to your point, it's like he was CEO of at least one other company at the time, I think, as well.
right.
Kind of serial entrepreneur type, and he's also kind of as Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire refers to him as hipster Rasputin. He kind of has his own like spiritual journey and things to attend to, and family obligations, I'm sure, all that kind of stuff. He did seem to be somewhat not figurehead in title only or in name only, but perhaps certainly less involved in the day-to-day decision making the day-to-day strategic decision making and enforcement decision making than Elon Musk is. Let's put it that way. Of course, I don't think it's fair to hold people to the Elon Musk standard. The dude is just an animal when it comes to doing this kind of stuff. So, that's not the.
Is he on performance enhancing drugs?
It would be hard to imagine that he's not. Like, I just don't know. But okay, so let's keep rocking and rolling. Let me bring the Twitter queue back up. All right. All right. So on January 7th, Jack emails employees saying Twitter needs to remain consistent. This is the day after the horrible stuff that happened on January 6th, including the right of users to return to Twitter after temporary suspension. Roth reassures an employee, quote, "People who care about this aren't happy with where we are." So essentially, Jack's emails have been fine. So that's the emails to Twitter that they need to be consistent on their policy. But Sam, maybe this is what you're talking about. Is there someone closer to the specifics who can reassure us that we're thinking about these problems the right way, more or less? And this is kind of where you start to see people in this Slack channel discussing, I'm assuming it's a Slack channel, discussing should we be, entertain the idea of permanently banning Donald Trump. And the other colleague of UL says something like, you don't have the luxury of being able to just pull the trigger and there'd be no consequences because, of course, there would be social backlash. Later that day, or I believe it's later that day, UL Roth, he messages his colleagues saying that Jack had approved the repeat offender for civic integrity issue, which was essentially that it looks like it, anyways, this 5-strike system, essentially label a tweet for the second strike, label plus a 12-hour suspension for the third one, label plus a 7-day suspension for the fourth one, and then a permanent suspension for the fifth one. And again, Trump's behavior on Twitter was not, I would say, not admirable at this time, but that's not quite the point here. So we kind of see this, it continues to develop over the next several days, over that day in terms of how they're thinking about what they're going to be allowed to do in the face of all this. And so people are complaining because Trump is saying certain things and petitioning to have certain things count as strikes. So here's what happens. On the 8th of January, so this is one day ahead, and Mike Schellenberger is talking about how this is foreshadowing, Twitter announces, after a close review of recent tweets from @RealDonaldTrump and the context around them, and that part about and the context around them is so critical. I highly, highly recommend people go back and listen to the Joe Rogan episode with Tim Pool, Timpool, Vijaya Gotti, and Jack Dorsey. I believe it's from 2018 or so. And try and keep count. You'll lose count after 30 minutes, but try and keep count of the amount of times that Vijaya Gotti talks about the word context, and that Jack Dorsey talks about context. But specifically how they have been received and interpreted on and off Twitter, meaning off-platform behavior. We have permanently suspended the account due to the risk of further incitement of violence. Now, they talk about further incitement of violence. The question is, To what extent was that substantiated and in what ways? January 8th, Twitter says that that's what they based it on. Now, notice what Mike Schellenberger does here is he talks about in 2019, Twitter says, we focus on language of reported tweets and do not attempt to determine all the potential interpretations of that content or its intent. Now, we know that's not true because they did stuff like ban people for saying learn to code when journalists lost their jobs because some journalists from those same outlets had told coal miners to just learn to code when they lost their jobs in years prior. But here we are. The only serious concern that Mike Schellenberger, Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss presumably found that expressed implications for free speech and democracy of banning Trump came from a junior person in the organization. It was tucked away in a low-level Slack channel known as Site Integrity Auto. Don't know exactly what that's for. And that person said, this might be an unpopular opinion, but one-off ad hoc decisions like this don't appear rooted in policy are a slippery slope, in my honest opinion, or humble opinion, and reflect an alternatively equal dictatorial program. This now appears to be a fiat by online platform CEO with a global presence that can gatekeep speech from the entire world, which seems unsustainable. Let's stop there. Sam Franklin.
Yeah.
Go.
Well, that's the one that I was referring to in the very beginning of this.
Yeah.
Because I just thought it was funny how there's one dude from a junior level in some obscure Slack channel. It's like, hey, he called it like exactly for what it is. That seems pretty dictatorial and not the direction we ought to be going. I really wonder context. I wonder what like the broader context of that conversation was like and how it was met with other people. I suspect it was like maybe people would dismiss what he had to say, but
I think we'll get the answers also because they're going to make all this public, right?
Oh, yeah.
Presumably.
So, yeah, presumably they'll make all this public.
Yeah.
What do you think that moving forward, it would be prudent for Twitter to make all their censoring decisions public?
Yeah, just have a post, like a posting thing. Yeah. That's actually something else that Elon Musk has discussed, which is like, if we take action on your account, you're going to know.
Yeah.
So that did happen in certain cases under the old leadership, but it is, semantics. But it was not always the case.
I mean, we have to admit though that under the old leadership, there was a good time for Twitter.
Sure. Yeah.
So the old Twitter, and then there's the old Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And I do think that people will, like, one of the critiques is this form of gaslighting, which is to say, like, oh, there's nothing new here. We knew this already. And these same journalists who are writing about this would have called you conspiratorially minded to say that there was shadow banning going on in 2018, 2019. And here's the issue.
Yeah.
Yes, Twitter as an organization had put out in their kind of community, I don't know if it's community notes or like essentially their public-facing documentation that they put out, that, they have the right to engage in throttling of certain information for anti-spam purposes, etc. Well, first of all, not all of this is anti-spam. That's one thing. And second, you had people testifying to Congress as well as talking about it on the Joe Rogan Experience, one of the most popular podcasts in the world, saying that we don't censor based on political ideology. And here's what happens. Again, it goes back to this Tower of Tautology idea that I talked about. What they do is they define the rules in such a way that they can say, this is our rule. And you can say, well, that's a politically biased rule. And they say, no, it's about harm, so it's not politically biased. The most salient example is one that Tim Pool discusses on that podcast. Sam, you already know where I'm going, which is Twitter's misgendering policy. Misgendering, by definition, according to Twitter, is to say that if I, Michael Lewis, a man, were to identify as a woman, and Sam were to call me a man, he has now misgendered me. Now, the opposite, many other philosophical schools would say, no, that's an inversion of misgendering. Misgendering is to say something that is not to identify someone in a way that is not in accord with their biological sex. That's how, many people would define misgendering. And so people will say, well, look, you have bias written into your rules. And rather than say, yes, this is a political statement, and we want to do this because we're worried about the harm. What they say is, no, it's not political. It's just designed to prevent harm. But it may be designed to prevent harm. Like maybe you have good intentions. I suspect many people do. I suspect most of these people who are involved in these decisions are genuinely trying to make the world better. I really do believe that. But they don't interface with, again, people who are rigorous, honest actors who disagree with them nearly enough. That's one of the problems of having this headquartered in San Francisco, probably. So
For sure.
the question then becomes, okay, well, how can you get feedback on these ideas in a way that doesn't allow for protected classes? And I don't mean that in the legal domain, the legal meaning of protected classes, but you don't create a certain group or groups of people who cannot be questioned or criticized, because this is what happens. People will say, well, we want to reduce harm online, so we're going to regulate speech. And then what happens is you set up a parallel system by which people can say, like, anything that is critical of me is harassment or harmful or an incitement to violence or whatever it is. Therefore, I can shut down any criticism of me. And if you don't think that this happens, look at Taylor Lorenz from the Washington Post and how she behaves online and what she's allowed to get away with in terms of how she goes after people, and then how she runs for cover when people mildly criticize her, as well as we talked about DHS and the Disinformation Governance Board, Nina Jankowicz, who she says that the Biden administration had to withdraw her application because she was ironically subject to a disinformation campaign. But so far, the articles I've read about this disinformation campaign are just people online who happen to be right-leaning or at least independent-minded, or both, pointing out that she was an avowed partisan, and that you can't have someone who's so nakedly partisan in a position like this. And again, I haven't read all of the pieces, so maybe there was like some genuine disinformation out there. But disinformation is supposed to mean intentionally false information designed to mislead people. If all they were doing was pointing out stuff she actually did, unless you, again, develop some sort of circular logic that can't be falsified, I don't see how you can apply that disinformation label there. So this kind of dynamic, this interplay between people who can't be criticized and people who kind of write the rules in this exchange, it's not a conspiracy. It's not like I think that there's some like grand orchestrated plan. I just think that the processes and kind of convergent groupthink lead to this type of behavior that we see now.
Yeah, I think when you're trying to, I think you're starting off on the wrong, just with wrong priors. You know, you're trying to decrease. You know, you're trying to create this platform with decreasing harm. It's not that one should want to increase harm, but you might ask yourself, is it possible or even favorable to decrease all the harm? And probably not, because you want some form of sharpening out there or maybe that's not the right word, but there needs to be something out there to which you can harden yourself. Otherwise, you're just going to go around and you're just going to be soft, and everything in the world is going to offend you. So like it's the attempt to get rid of bullies in schools. One, you'll never do it. Two, bullies do have somewhat of a function. I mean, it's true, it's not fun being bullied, and I was at some point. But what I did is I stood up for myself and made me better. Bully stopped bullying me, and there's something to be said there. So I think it's just you're starting off with wrong, in the wrong direction, I think, for this whole thing.
Yeah, going back to the Jordan Peterson analogy, at the level of the individual, better to be strong than have the veneer of safety, right? If you're someone who is fragile in some way, if you can develop or inculcate some fortitude, then that is much more useful in a variety of circumstances and over the long term than trying to stay sheltered in a safe place. But certainly, none of us are advocating for digital environment where people just get constantly harassed, even for people who I think are terrible actors. It really, like when Taylor Lorenz posts in a story a link to information about that is publicly traceable, that has someone's address, the subject of her story's address, the libs of TikTok person, her address. It's like she'll claim, and they'll edit after the fact this link away, and they'll be like, "Oh, we didn't post the address." It's like, yeah, you didn't post the address, but if you clicked on the hyperlink in your original story, it took you to something where you could get the address. And if someone did that to your journalist, Washington Post, you would have a conniption. And in my perspective is justifiably. There's no room for, no excuse for doxing online. But again, it goes back to this: do you have clear definitions and uniform enforcement? And in this sense, you don't have uniform enforcement.
Yeah,
I think there's the definition. I mean, there's a line though between doxing and bullying.
Sure, of course.
I think bullying is more acceptable when it's children,
Mm-hmm.
as bad as that sounds. But to some degree, I think bullying is necessary in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never get rid of them, and I think you can clearly see that in the attempt to get rid of bullies online, the Twitter, the few people in charge of Twitter could be viewed as bullies themselves, because all they were doing is just putting their finger on the scale and saying, well, we're trying to make this a safe space and get rid of bullies, but we don't like what you have to say, and so you're gone. So yeah, you're just bullying all these small accounts, just deleting them out of existence. So yeah, no good.
Okay. All right, so let's pick back up a little bit. And this is actually a little bit beyond where I had read before we got tonight. But so I've skipped over a few. Essentially, they talk about the issues with trying to ban the Stop the Steal hashtag and some, and the word Kraken, because it was associated with some untrue election narrative stuff, as well as a variety of other things. And the fact that it was
cryptocurrency.
Among others. Yeah. So it was a very complicated web to untangle. And so they essentially didn't do it well, though they thought they maybe could give it a shot. So here's what we'll pick back up. At noon on, I believe this is January 7th, a sales exec notes that Jack says, "We, Twitter, will permanently suspend Donald Trump if our policies are violated after a 12-hour account lock." And again, Yoel Roth, head of trust and safety, says this would be for any policy violation, not just elections. There's a ton of interest in our position on this. Stay in touch. We want to make sure we stay aligned, that kind of stuff. And then Mike Schellenberger notes, and this is where people in legacy media get very upset, because what Mike Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss are doing is they're weaving a narrative around these source documents. And once everything is fully transparent, we'll be able to see whether they were being selective and just curating stuff for their own, to try and generate clicks or whatever. And there will be organizations that claim that, whether it's true or not. So I would encourage people to do their own research. But legacy media is mad because there's absolutely nothing they can do to stop Mike Schellenberger from saying this next sentence, and it drives them crazy. What happens next is essentially understanding how Twitter justified banning Trump. Right? It would be much more convenient to say something like, "Oh, like we're going to take the public-facing explanation from Twitter or from their comms department, from their safety team or their comms department about why they did it," as opposed to looking underneath the hood and seeing kind of what was going on. So, sales guys, we're dropping public interest policy for now. And Roth says, go ahead.
Sorry. I mean, yeah, they completely changed the rules. I think somewhere in there they say, normally we wouldn't do this for other political, like world leaders, but in this instance, we're changing it. I mean, clearly they are, they're purposefully bending the rules because of their dislike for Trump, and they're going to get the outcome that they want, obviously, and they're bending the rules that that they can to achieve it.
And to steel man their case, what they would say is, and you have to look at the context around what was happening at the time, right? So January 6th had just happened, and he's going on and on about this election being stolen kind of stuff, and as are people around him.
Sure, but there's isn't it like the head of like ISIS is still on or something like that?
No,
or
you're
is,
talking about
or
the supreme leader of Iran. Yeah, right.
oh, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like, okay, but
Right.
context.
Yeah. Well, the context is, something like cultural relativism in that situation.
Yes, yeah.
Which is unbelievable. But so this is the public interest policy from Twitter. At present, we limit exceptions to one critical type of public interest content: tweets from elected and government officials, which would justify the supreme leader of Iran being on, for example, but not in a way that also would nullify Donald Trump being on. Given the significant public interest in knowing and being able to discuss their actions and statements, that is the elected government officials. So that's the public interest. So they're going to drop that. Looks like Yoel Roth pushed for a permanent suspension of Matt Gaetz. I'm sure that will generate quite the response from Matt Gaetz, who is a eclectic individual, let's say. So here we go. What is the latest on Antifa claims? Anything brewing policy-wise? C is yelling at us from the other room that we should just ban Matt Gaetz. Yeah, SP and SI are working on that. Those are some of, at least I think that's some of the higher councils looking at making some of the moderation decisions of cases that come up. The banning doesn't quite fit anywhere. Duh. That's pretty indicting, I would think. Right. From someone else, Yoel Roth. But I'm trying to talk safety into treating it as incitement. Holy smokes. I think we'll get over the line for removal as conspiracy that incites violence. Vijaya was directionally okay with it. Man. Okay. That's to the extent that Mike Schellenberger has honestly and even-handedly represented what was said in that exchange. That is kind of picture perfect for the way people had accused Twitter of behaving. Hey, you have these rules. You're bending them and contorting them in ways to make it easier to get rid of some people in ways that you will not apply it to others. So it violates both of our core concepts, the clear, precise definitions, as well as the uniform enforcement.
Do you know who C is in this one?
I don't.
So C is yelling at us from the other room.
Maybe comms. I don't know. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But it could be.
Yeah.
I will say this, by the way, one thing that came out between the Twitter first dump and the second dump, Barry Weiss said that she and Matt Taibbi were getting slow-rolled this information, and they asked who was responsible for getting these communications sent to them. And someone responded to her, Jim.
Yeah, Jim who?
And she goes, Jim who? Jim Baker. Jim Baker is someone we mentioned in the last live stream. He was, I believe, deputy counsel for Twitter. And he was the person who was involved with several of the how would I say this? Several of the aspects of the Russian collusion narrative that didn't pan out in the way that we were told they were going to. And then he became a leader at Twitter. And so the person who perhaps has a vested interest in both protecting any political action, even if it's not partisan. It doesn't have to be like, he was acting for Democrats or whatever. It could just be he was acting in a manner that is against a particular set of political officials. It seems he would have an incentive to cover that up, though we don't have any direct evidence of that. But also, given his former employment, what the mainstream media said after the first Twitter files was, look, there's no smoking gun about the federal government colluding with Twitter to censor people. And then, of course, by the end of the third Twitter dump, you hear much less of that. But he would have an incentive, presumably. I mean, he could have an incentive to refuse to disclose some of that information.
Yeah, throttle some info. Yeah.
And again,
he was promptly taken out of the building.
Yeah. So he was, he's in need of employment. God bless him. Hope he finds something he can do where he puts less pressure on the scales socially, maybe. But yeah, again, I'm not claiming he did these things. I'm just saying, if you were a defendant and someone responsible for handling the evidence had a conflict of interest that cut against you, you would want that judge to throw out that evidence. And this is kind of a similar thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so back to this thread.
Does Elon just need to buy up all the social media platforms? I mean, what needs to happen here?
No, because
I mean,
we can't have this thing where Elon just saves the day for everything. Like, people need to be bold and build things. And
Well, this is one thing that I was thinking about. Do you think that Elon's handling of Twitter, where he comes in and he's just releasing all this and sort of acting as the white knight, do you think that would encourage other leaders of these tech companies to perhaps do the same, or do you think they're too far gone?
no, I don't. I don't think that they're too far gone. Maybe I shouldn't. Thank you for asking this because I should be clear. Like, I'm actually very pro these platforms. I just think that you shouldn't only have people from the coast in really important decision-making positions, and you shouldn't have people who are like have ideological diversity, but you exclude certain factions of the spectrum that are well represented in the populace. You say like something like, well, these ideas are off limits, and so we don't need to take them into consideration when we're making policy decisions or enforcement decisions. Elon said something like this, like transparency leads to reconciliation. And I think that that's true. I don't see how it could be any other way.
Yeah.
I think that it's really messy right now, and I really hope that Mike Schellenberger, Matt Taibbi, and Barry Weiss are doing an honest job representing this. And if they are, the dishonest actors in media will try and undermine them as they continue to drip this stuff out, as well as once everything becomes public. But they will largely be unsuccessful if these guys are doing a good job with it. And then we can start the rebuilding process where we say, okay, we've got a platform that says something like, yeah, not hate speech, but hateful speech will be deboosted, but we're going to make it very transparent whenever we make these decisions, and people will know, and it's just going to be that tweet. It's not going to be an account, and we're not going to shadow ban. And he also said, if you've been shadow banned, we're going to make everyone who has been shadow banned in one form or another, make them aware of it, and they can apply to be unshadow banned. And people are going to be allowed back on platform. I think, and maybe you set something up like that warranty claim process that we talked about to help make the marketplace of ideas function more like a market. I think that if you can do that, if you can pull that off, man, I think that it really does change things for the better in terms of discourse in this country, in terms of people being able to divest from the easy media narratives that get put out there and to think for themselves. And also, as a second order consequence of this, I think it creates a less toxic online discourse because people don't feel like the system's rigged against them.
For sure. I
how
think
do you control?
Go ahead, Franklin. Sorry.
I was gonna say, how do you control the government coming in though and saying, hey, we have potential disinformation coming in, but not being, really clear on what they expect to come in.
I would say,
and then people that just the media company just blocking whatever they think is disinformation.
it's tough. It's a type 1, type 2 error thing, right? Did you block something you shouldn't have, or did you fail to block something you should have? It's tough. You're not going to get it perfectly, and you need to be honest like when you do, and you need to be honest before you get on the world's largest podcast and are pushed for 3 hours by an intrepid, somewhat heterodox thinking independent journalist like Tim Pool. People get mad that I'm like vouching for Tim Pool, but he did a bang up job in that episode. You can't be like, oh yeah, we probably got that wrong, like after the fact in a way where you can't really do anything. There needs to be like, I'm likely to forgive you if you transgress against me if you seem contrite.
Yeah.
But if I say like, hey man, like a couple weeks ago, like you really like kind of like came at me sideways that way, and you're like, oh yeah, sorry about that. Nothing we can do now, but sorry about that. I don't believe you. It has, yeah, it's provided no signal that in the future you're going to behave differently. Whereas if you think like, oh, hey, look, this is how we messed up. This is how we're going to try and avoid doing that in the future. Is it going to be perfect? No. Is it going to make everyone happy? No. But it will be better. It will be better than what was there, or it won't succeed. One of those two outcomes.
My optimist side says that what Elon's doing is he's setting a precedent, and now for your platform to have the amount of trust that Twitter will eventually have, you need to start making this stuff more transparent. And the ones that don't are just going to be, I think, forgotten or just left behind. And so I'm optimistic that that might happen. Maybe this goes back to the whole ramification, like what's going to actually happen to these people. Well, maybe nothing, but there doesn't. I guess they're really in the long scheme of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be a justice brought upon some of these people. It just needs the ship just needs to correct its course, and I think that'd be obviously it'd be ideal if maybe some charges were brought and something were to happen. But
what?
as long as
But if there's nothing criminal, you don't want to. This isn't lynch mobs.
No. Well, the government coming in and censoring free speech, that's certainly criminal.
Well,
and then
it may be subject to lawsuit. I don't know if it's criminal or civil. It probably depends.
Sorry, that's what I meant.
Yeah. Okay.
They didn't really censor because they came in and they said,
that
might have something in.
That will be an interesting case that's currently playing out in the courts, which is a series of cases, which is what does it take for it to constitute? Obviously, if the government says we're sending in the Marines to take over Twitter headquarters in order to start shutting down speech we don't like, that is a violation of the First Amendment, in addition to a whole bunch of other stuff. But is it a violation if they say, if Donald Trump or Joe Biden pick up the phone and call Jack Dorsey and say, I want this information off Twitter? Is it a violation if DHS meets with you regularly and says, we expect certain types of information to be coming out soon. Would sure be nice if you would take it off. Or if regulators at the FEC, for example, or Senate oversight committees, if they come in and they say, hey, there are these stories that make us look bad. Would be good if they went away, whether they're true or not. Or maybe they're true, but they're also being amplified by Russian disinformation. Maybe it's genuinely true, and Russian bots are amplifying it because Russia likes to sow discord, and because we have such short-term thinking in the United States, we think, oh, well, if Russia's amplifying it, we should ignore the content. We should just focus on the fact that it's being amplified by Russians. That's all the signal we need. And so what happens if they come in and say, hey, we're in charge of regulating you or legislating your industry? Would sure be nice if this went away. Like how explicit does the call for censorship, the imposition for censorship need to be such that it is de facto a government action? I don't know. And no one knows. If we're being honest, we don't know yet. But we're going to find out in the next couple of years.
What court case is it going?
I don't know off the top of my head. There are a couple that were talked about or have been talked about in the last month on Viva and Barnes. They have a podcast comes out on Sunday or Monday. Go to Viva, VIVA, Barnes, BARNES, .locals.com. vivabarnes.locals.com. That's their community. You can also find their full streams on Sunday on Rumble. I don't agree with everything these guys say. They definitely have a much more populist right-wing bent to them. But one is a kind of a constitutional lawyer who's argued before the Supreme Court. One's a former litigator from Canada, moved to Florida, kind of eccentric type. They're an interesting group of people to talk to. I get asked sometimes, like, how are you aware of like all this kind of noise that's going on out there? And the answer is, I listen to podcasts. I listen to about a half dozen podcasts that I've curated, and that's one of them. And they're ideologically diverse. That one happens to be much more from the right, or one of the people on that podcast happens to be much more from the right wing. But they talk about those court cases. So if you're interested, that's where I would direct you. And then get the court case names and then go read about them from somewhere else. Jonathan Turley is an excellent resource for this type of stuff. He's been publishing on these Twitter files and free speech issues. He's old school left-wing attorney. That's my read anyway on him. I could be wrong. All right. Do we want to come back and try and wrap this up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
Okay. Let's run through this. So they're talking about the QAnon ban. Roth, hence. So from Roth. To put a different spin on it, policy is one part of how the system works. There are different things you can change when you want to affect different behaviors. Policy and enforcement are one. The product is another. Partnerships and outreach are another. So that's kind of advertisers, boycott campaigns, NGOs, that kind of stuff. And all of it's situated in a bigger system, i.e. the world, which influences how everything else operates in practice. Man, it's so beyond the scope of what Twitter should be trying to control. When you change one part of the system, you necessarily have to adapt to the rest. We ran into a world changing faster than we were able to adapt the product or policy. But we can and should do both. Again, same junior employee. I hope this guy's like ends up becoming like a senior product manager under Musk.
That was Ligma.
Yeah, that was Ligma. Same says, express an unpopular opinion, ad hoc decisions, they don't appear rooted in policy. Slippery slope, seems unsustainable.
Which one are you on?
Oh, I don't. So this is from an hour ago. So this is from an hour ago, from 2 hours ago. But that employee wrote, "My concern is specifically surrounding the unarticulated logic of the decision by Facebook. That's the space that fills with the idea, conspiracy theory, that all social media heads and internet moguls at every layer sit around like kings, casually deciding what people can and cannot see, and it's unhelpful to the internet ecosystem as a whole." Again, this is my opinion only. And we saw this, by the way, because after what happened here, what happened? Parler was the most downloaded app, a competitor to Twitter, and the gatekeeping moved upstream one level. It went from online platform to app store, and the app stores refused to carry Parler. So this is, it's not so much a conspiracy so much as a misalignment and bastardization of processes and incentives that allows for this kind of stuff. Though perhaps, go ahead.
What? No. I wanted to get back.
Please.
What was the definition of conspiracy?
I don't have a good one offhand, but it's something like an instance or an event for which there's a lot of divergent opinions and for which grounding what actually happened is difficult. Something like that.
Grounding
can be difficult.
Can be difficult.
Can be difficult, yeah. It's probably not a necessary condition.
Everything could be a conspiracy.
Well, certainly it's treated that way, right? You could say something like, if the New York Times writes an editorial piece that says we can replace them, it's kind of about immigration and demographic change in the United States, and they make that note, and the right says, oh, look, the editorial board for the New York Times is more or less celebrating this fact, and they get called people who are giving way to, quote unquote, the great replacement theory and conspiracy. It's like, no, those are two separate things. Like, yeah, there's some overlap in the Venn diagram, but there's a whole bunch of necessary conditions in the great replacement theory that aren't satisfied just by saying, it looks like these people over here have this particular idea. And so, yes, the conspiracy theory is a pejorative that people who want to control the narrative, it is not only this, but it is also this. It's a pejorative that people who want to control narrative or discredit others banty about recklessly, just like one side of the political aisle has bantied about the term racist or fascist recklessly for at least the past decade, such that it means much less than it used to. By the way, this was true of the conservatives in the 90s and 2000s from what I remember and what I've read, which is calling everything that they didn't like communism. It's like, no, like a progressive tax system is not communism. Like, come on. Having a welfare state is not having a measured welfare state is not communism. That's not
communism.
That's not the problem we had with Stalin and Mao, that they had social security. That wasn't the issue. All right. So anyway, we'll stop there for now. Barry Weiss will have an update tomorrow. Apparently, Facebook acted to remove Trump before Twitter. I don't know if they did that or not, but essentially there's going to be some interplay between those two social media organizations that they'll discuss tomorrow. So it was a little bit kind of haphazard. We were reading some of it for the first time in real time, but I encourage people to go look at each of the Twitter file dumps, follow Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss, and Michael Schellenberger on Twitter, and visit the Free Press, their new organization, as well as FreedomCast. Bookmark freedomcast.us, We have a page called What We're Following. It's where all of the news, podcasts, videos, stuff we find interesting is, as well as it has a link to our weekly newswire, which will be a free feature coming in 2023. We're beta testing it now, trying to find the best user-friendly format for it. FreedomCast.locals.com is where you can support our work and get early access to videos, podcasts, articles we put out, as well as access to private live streams that we will do with our community. So it won't just be us up here talking, it will be other people as well.
Make sure you
Perfect.
subscribe, David.
Yeah, David, subscribe. Silo 10, appreciate you all being here. Sarah as well. I know we had some others. Kyle, thank you. For all those listening, appreciate it. And until next time, stay honest, stay rigorous, and keep speaking freely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So it keeps recording for about 5 seconds.